Hi, everyone. My name's Anthony Ruggiano, and in 1988, I was struggling with addiction, and I went into a treatment center. I set up a helpline number, which is 855-963-2113. That's 855-963-2113. That number, phones will be manned 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So if you're struggling with addiction, or you know someone that is struggling with addiction, please call that number and let me help. I will be hands-on. I will be personally involved in the person's recovery. They will meet me. They will spend time with me, and I will help them live a life beyond their wildest dreams. So please, if you know anybody that has a problem with addiction, or you yourself have a problem with addiction, please call that number and let me help. And also help their family members or friends. Please call that number, 855-963-2113. That's 855-963-2113. Welcome everybody to Reform Gangsters. This is Anthony Ruggiano Jr., and we're here to start off the week, which is a week before Christmas. As you can see, I got my Santa Claus shirt on. You know, I'm getting ready for the holidays, and my little stockings are above my head. My tree's to my right. I have some viewer polls here that we'd like to talk about real or fake trees. So when I was a kid, we always had a real tree, you know, and you know, so my father was this big gangster, right? And when I was a little kid, like every Christmas week, because it was like a tradition, he would take my brother and myself, just the two of us, about 2 days before Christmas Eve. And we would go to this one Christmas tree place in Ozone Park. And I remember it was always cold and it was snowing a lot. And we would always go at night for some reason, which was cool. We would always go at night. And here's this big gangster with his two sons. And we would go, the three of us, and we would go there. And he knew the people that ran the place. Like as soon as he walked in, they were like up his ass, like, you know, catering to him. But I was a little kid. I didn't really know what was going on. I just knew they were treating him special. Him and I and my brother, my kid brother Albert, we would pick out the family Christmas tree. And we did this every Christmas. The three of us would go, and they would give me candy there, and they would have marshmallows, and they had big barrels. I remember they had big barrels, and they had fires in the barrel because they would burn the branches that fell off the trees, and I remember the smell of the pine burning, and they would give us hot chocolates, and they would talk to my father, you know, and it was really cool, you know, and you know, even though he was a gangster, you know, he was still a father, right? And we would pick out the tree. And we would go home, and I remember we had a stand, and he would put 2 aspirins in the water of the tree stand. He said, I don't know why he did that. And he would put 2, and then he would put the tree in, and he would leave it there so the branches would open, and we would leave it there. And then Christmas Eve, now I didn't notice when I was a kid where he went, but I learned later on. So then Christmas Eve, he would get up, and he would get dressed in a suit and tie, and he would leave Christmas Eve. He would go out. Like 12 o'clock in the afternoon, he was gone. And he would not come home till the night. And my mother or his friend would come over, and they would make all the fish and everything, because we ate a lot of fish, you know, the 7 fishes, the night of the 7 fishes. The Italian people, that's how they do Christmas Eve. We used to eat fish, linguine with lobster sauce and all kinds of fish. And then at midnight, my father would fry sausage and peppers. At midnight, we would have sausage and pepper heroes. And a lot of his friends would come over. So he would go out anyway. He would go out, and he would come back home like around 7 o'clock, and we decorate the tree. We would decorate the tree Christmas Eve night to 4 to 5 of us, my mother, my father, my sister, my brother, and myself. We would decorate the tree. And then we would go to sleep, and Santa Claus would come. Years later, when I became a teenager and I started hanging out with him, I knew where he went on Christmas Eve, because he started taking me with him, and the routine was he would bring up. We didn't no longer go with him to get the Christmas tree. My mother would go with him. That tradition sort of stopped when we became teenagers, me and my brother. So my mother would get the tree, but we always had a real tree when I was a kid. Even then, when I was a teenager, and we would go we would go, we would go out to his bar. He owned a bar named Bulldogs, and we would go there on Christmas Eve, and all his friends would come. Guys would come from all over the city that were with him. Guys that were with him that only came once a year. Like he had legitimate guys with him that owned car lots and legitimate construction companies and like legitimate businesses that were bookmakers on their job and Shylocks on their job. And they never came around, these guys. They would only come on Christmas Eve and they would give him an envelope. And that's all the money he got off them. He only got money off them once a year. And all the guys that were with him, like Nicky, Carrazza, and Lenny, and all them guys that later on became made members of the mob, would give him envelopes, and he would collect a lot of money on Christmas Eve. And then I remember him and Tony Lee would go in the back of the bar, and they would open up all the envelopes and split because they were partners, and split the money. And then they would make an envelope up for the Bugada, which is the boss, the underboss, and the consigliere and their captain. They would make an envelope up for them, and then we'd all go to get in our cars, and we'd all go to Mulberry Street, and we'd all go to the Ravenite on Christmas Eve. It was a tradition. My father did that from when I was born. He went to the Ravenite on Christmas Eve. I just didn't know that's where he was going until I actually went with him. And the Ravenite would be mobbed, and you would see every wise guy. Like there would be wise guys in there you didn't see all year, but you would see them like coming from the Bronx. I mean, it was mobbed. They would give Neil an envelope, and we would drink coffee and laugh and kiss each other at Merry Christmas, and it was packed, all wise guys, and it was cool. And I would hang out with Neil's son, Buddy, and we would, be drinking coffee, and people, we would, Andy's son and Buddy, my friends would come, kids that were with me, my friend Sal and little Joe and all my friends would come. And I loved Christmas Eve. I still do. That's my favorite holiday. And we would drink and get, and then we'd go home and we'd eat the fish. And then his friends would start coming over, like after they would leave their families, and then a couple of his friends would come over, and we'd stay up till like late, drinking, talking, laughing. So Christmas Eve was always a good time, it was always nice. And it continued in the Ravenite. I remember, so after they assassinated Paul Castellano and John became the boss, he had a big party. Must have been 300 wise guys and guys that were proposed, because that's the only people that were able to go. And of course I went. I sat with Tony Lee, and John was there and everything, and that was packed. John Gotti's first Christmas Eve at the Ravenite, you couldn't get in the door. It was triple packed than when Neil was alive. You literally couldn't get in the door. Like that's how it was. Insanely, it was ridiculous. That's how crowded, because everybody wanted to be up John Gotti's ass. Like it turned us off. It turned, like the Ozone Park guys that were the closest to John, it turned us off. Like it turned me off, and it turned Tony Lee off. He wasn't happy about it. That was the mob's Christmas Eve. We always celebrated Christmas. I don't think they were celebrating the birth of Christ, but I think it was more a tradition. And now you're talking about guys that really had nothing when they were children. They came from poverty. My father, John Gotti. I mean, now they have a couple of dollars, and they have families, wives, and kids, and it was a good day. Christmas Eve was a good day. The first Christmas I spent when I was a kid and I went to prison the first time in 1978, we had packages. We got packages. We had visits, and our families brought us up a lot of holiday food. Like pies, and because we always had connections with the COs. So we got stuff through the package room that you weren't really allowed to have, like homemade cakes and pies, and some of the homemade foods. But it was we ate a lot of food. We had a lot of stuff brought in from the street. We were all like sort of in the same boat. We're all missing our families. We made the best of it. I would call my kids up. I would call my family up, of course, and I would get a lot of visits that week. Right, the week before Christmas, my family would come up to visit me. But it wasn't sad. It was the time went by slow. Like when Christmas rolled around and the time slowed up, like it just slowed up. And then later on, when I got to the feds, when I was in the Fed joint in Schuylkill. It's funny because they would decorate. We put up a tree. There was a big, nice tree put up in our block, and you know, we couldn't get packages there from the street, but they would cook special meals, and they would have a party out in the yard, a band playing, and they would have tournaments, and they try to make it as festive as you can. But again, you know, the time went by slow, and it was a little, you know, you miss your family. You know, now by then I had 2 kids. You know, I'd call up, and my daughter was little, and you know, I would call up early in the morning, and you know, she would be, you know, just waking up, opening up her gifts, and you know, and we would like do it like with me on the phone, my wife telling me what's going on. Like I was there, but I was up there on the phone, you know, while it was going on. And it's a shitty place to be on the holidays. I mean, you know, that's the bottom line, you know, but you make the best of it. Listen, there's only 2 things you could do in prison. You know, either you could get comfortable and read a book, or you could drive yourself crazy. You know, you can't open the, you know, my father told me when I did my first bid, he said, they could take everything they want from us, but they can't stop the clock. If that makes sense to convicts. I don't know if it makes sense to the rest of the world, but what he meant by that, they can't stop the clock. So the door's going to close, and eventually the door's going to open. But in between, they could take everything. They could take whatever they want, but they can't stop the clock. Not a lot, but I have some pictures of me in the Fed joint, you know, around the Christmas tree with my crew around the Christmas tree with me, Kevin Kelly, who was a Westie, my co-defendant Sal Pecchio, this other guy, Donnie, he was with the Lucchese's. He was a big heroin dealer. A couple of people. I think Anthony Rizzo, he was a captain with the Colombos. I watched the OC Shorts channel 2 days ago about O'Neill being beat up by Joe Gallo and his crew in 1961. Nobody got killed behind it. That's hard to believe that nobody, you know, died behind it, something like that. You know, especially knowing O'Neill. You know, he was a gangster. I mean, you know, he was a killer. My father, you know, his whole crew were killers. I mean, that whole regime was shooters. So, I mean, for them to let them guys have a past beating up Neil, that's hard for me to swallow. You know, so like I said, I don't know nothing about that. I know my father had a strong hate for Joe Gallo, crazy Joe Gallo. He never liked him, but he got along with his brother Larry, and he got along with his brother Albert, because I met Larry and I met Albert. And so I don't know if that's true or not. According to the FBI, that's where this guy's quoting his information from confidential informants. I never heard that story, and I was pretty tight with them. Buddy never mentioned it to me. My father never mentioned it to me. My father had a beef in the Copa. He had a fist fight in the Copa, and you weren't allowed to fight in the Copa. On the steps leading down into the showroom, he had a fight with another wise guy, with this guy called Philly the Brush. And they had this big sit down with, and my father got reprimanded by Carlo Gambino for that, but nobody got killed over it. But he actually had a fist fight in the Copa, and that was a big no-no, because the 5 bosses, each boss had a piece of the Copa, inherited a piece of the Copa. That money went right directly to the bosses of the 5 families. And Julius Spadell, he was like the front man for the mob. He ran the Copa.
Clan.
Your question of the week is from Rock Clan, and it's, do I know Jimmy Agro? But his name is Tommy Agro. And yes, I know him. He was a wise guy. He was with Joe Piney, and he's actually the guy that got my father jammed up in Florida. He was a soldier in the Gambino family, and he was with, like I said, Joe Piney, who actually was in on the Paul Castellano assassination. Joe Piney, he was a captain in the Gambino family, and he had a problem down there with wise guys out of Tampa, Trapacanti, the boss, and my father was friends with him, and they sent for my father, and my father flew up to New York. And he met with Paul Castellano and Joe Gallo, who was the consigliere at the time. And they asked my father if he could introduce Tommy to Traficante and sit down and represent them, because he had a problem with them over a bingo hall. Because in Florida back then, the bingo halls were big money. They were legal. Before the casinos in Florida, they had bingo halls, and the mob controlled the bingo halls with the Seminole Indians. But they were, all the bingo halls were mobbed up. And Tommy had a bingo hall. So Tommy flew down, and my father introduced him to Trafficante in Tampa, and they straightened it all out. And Tommy had a crew of guys down here, which one of them was Bobby DeSimone, who actually was Tommy DeSimone's brother, who my father knew, but he was with Tommy. And this other guy, Joe Dogs, who was with Tommy. And Tommy asked my father, while he was in New York, if my father could service them, which meant, could my father look out for them, sit down for them, you know, and my father, of course, said yes. And so Tommy would fly back and forth with his girlfriend, and we would always be together when Tommy was in Florida. And Joe Dogs, who a lot of people know about him, cooperated, and that's how my father got to 40 years. Joe Dogs cooperated, and my father and Tommy got indicted with Bobby DeSimone and Sal Real and Frank Abidando and Sky Jerry, and they all went to prison. He passed away, Tommy. He died of lung cancer. He actually cooperated at the end too. When he was dying of cancer, he signed a confession, and he got released. He didn't want to die in prison, so he signed a confession, and he gave up my father, and he died of lung cancer. So I just want to send out a Christmas message out there to all the young fellows out there, ladies and gentlemen, that, you know, first of all, the mob life ain't all that. So stay away from wise guys, and go stay in school. And if you're suffering from addiction, you know, I know the holidays are tough to stay clean. You know, it's a big party time, and you're going to be around people that are drinking and drugging, but, you know, have a plan, you know, and I know for a fact that if I could stay clean, you could stay clean. So please join Reform Gangsters, and I hope to see you soon.